Welcome to the Revo Report. We're inspiring faith with reason and reason with faith. Okay, welcome everybody. Today we have a special guest, and we've been talking for a little bit, but now she was interviewing me, now I'm going to interview her. And I'm excited because I know that what you guys are going to learn today is going to be very special and very helpful, especially for those of us really wanting to reach out to others. Maybe you have doubt in your faith. Maybe you have questions about Christianity. Maybe you have questions about the Bible. Maybe you're an atheist, agnostic. And today's guest is Dr. Jana Harmon. She's a scholar specializing in the study of religious conversions, particularly focusing on atheists who become Christians. She has a PhD in religion and theology from the University of Birmingham, UK, and she serves as an adjunct professor in cultural apologetics at Biola University. And so she's also the host of Ex-Skeptic podcast, which I was just on, and is just a wonderful place to check out stories and real life testimonies of former atheists finding God. And so we're going to link that down below. Make sure to check that out. And without further ado, let's welcome in Dr. Jana. Hi, Jana.
Hi,
welcome. Hey, thanks so much for being here.
It's my pleasure, really. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's been a great joy. We've been talking for a little bit already, and it's just been so refreshing, to hear from you, to be able to share my story. And now I get to pick your brain. And this is what I'm really excited about. And my first question really to you is, what inspired you to focus on this type of research? You could have done so much, with your PhD, but why did you choose particularly, atheists converting to Christianity? Why not, other religions converting to Christianity, or why not any other topic for your PhD?
That's a great question, Vince. I really was birthed from my experience of having gone to graduate school in Christian apologetics, learning that the comprehensive and cohesive worldview that Christianity presents, that it was very convincing for me. It seemed to be logical, rational, reasonable, evidential. But what I noticed over the years after I graduated, I thought it's very convincing for me. Why doesn't it seem as convincing for other people? That you, having been in the apologetics world and probably talked to a lot of skeptics and a lot of atheists, oftentimes the Christian worldview and the atheist worldview are juxtaposed. So when you see debates, it's usually between the Christian and the atheist, because I believe both of those worldviews, really more than others, really ground themselves in objective reality, in the idea of objective truth, that there are facts on the ground to be seen, to be open to take a look at and judge and compare and contrast. Wow. And so it seemed to me that these discussions, these debates, these writings, that nothing seemed to budge the atheist. I thought, well, if the intellectual arguments and evidence are on the side of Christianity, why not? Why are they so resistant? Why are they not budging? Why is, people aren't running to Christianity from the atheist side? So I started reading a little bit more. I'm with the C.S. Lewis Institute. Of course, I learned, reading C.S. Lewis about the abolition of man and the passions, and the reasons, and I was reading Blaise Pascal about that we make decisions sometimes not for rational reasons, but for things that we find attractive, we tend to believe. And so I just started thinking, there's a lot more to this than just a rational argument, why people might believe or might not believe, why people might reject or push back without even a thought. And I was thinking, I guess this is really more personal. Like, for example, my husband played football for the University of Georgia. He grew up in Georgia. He socially was ingratiated in that culture where boy, playing at the University of Georgia would be like the best thing since sliced bread. He actually got a full scholarship there.
Wow.
That was his game. That was his experience. That was where he invested his life. Those were his people. And since then, then my daughter went to Auburn, and I that wasn't it wasn't like I expected him because of perhaps maybe Auburn had something better statistically than Georgia. Well, he
Mm.
had a personal allegiance. There was a lot more than
Mm.
statistics that kept him as the Georgia fan.
Right.
For him to come over and say, no, oh, I believe Auburn is wonderful. It has taken, I can tell you, several years to even consider saying something positive about Auburn as compared to Georgia. Not because of it might have been better for my daughter or whatever, or statistically better, intellectually, I could convince him, but he had all these personal allegiances, these social reasons, these experiences, these positive experiences that kept him believing one thing. I could not convince him, in a sense, to switch sides. And I think sometimes we as Christians think that if we just put out an intellectual argument that might be convincing, we're not thinking of the whole person, of their background, of their experience, of where they grew up, what were they exposed to, what was religion to them. And so when I
Wow.
went to go look at this question, what would it take for an atheist to become a Christian? Was it something intellectual, or was something more or different? I wanted to take a very holistic look at the reasons why we as humans believe or reject anything, how we change our minds, how we move from a place of resistance towards openness, towards a different way of thinking or living. But because I had come from this background in apologetics, and I sincerely want, when you know Christ, there's nothing better, right? It is
Yeah.
life itself. And so there's a part of me that wants the atheist also to know what I found as a Christian, but intellectually, in a sober-minded way, I wanted to take a look at what it would take for an atheist to become a Christian, for those reasons.
And one of your questions before was, why aren't they budging? So if I could follow up with that, what do you see as maybe the top 3 reasons why some atheists really will not budge? What will keep them, a skeptic?
That's a great question. Tom Scott says it this way: there's the reasons that someone gives, and then there are the real reasons. But for many who are very in an intellectually honest way,
Yeah.
they don't believe that God and, say, intellect or science can coexist. They believe that it is the intellectually sober-minded way to approach reality. They believe that it's true. For them, what they understand, what they've been taught, what they've heard
Yeah.
from people around them, from authorities in their lives, it may be the only thing that they really embrace, that they really believe that it's true. And they may even say, I wish I could believe in that, but I just don't. I can't. It's not
Right.
true. So there's that. There's some who reject belief in God because of some experience in their life, some difficult life experience. They can't see or feel God. They can't imagine a good God existing because look at that, some event, some, again, sober-minded or just difficult circumstances in their lives, some abuse, some neglect. It may be a bad experience with a religious person. They can't see, how could there be a good God when these Christians are not good? They look at what they do, look at who they are, look how they've treated me. So experientially, it may be something that is just not attractive. Some people grow up just not thinking about the question at all. It's just not a
Right.
relevant question. They grow up in an environment where God isn't part of the picture. It may be, it may, like one guy said, it was it was for other people, and I'm not other people. It's for, like a hobby,
Mm,
like going bowling, or, or a crutch, or
right.
something, it's good for them. They need that. I don't need that. I'm happy on my own. I'm well adjusted. I don't need some kind of moral barometer, some cosmic
Mm,
authority telling me what to do. I'm good. I'm on my own. I'm fine. I don't need that. So they
mm,
need it. They don't want it. Perhaps also that there has been a very negative hue about religion and religious faith and Christianity in these past few years. That's changing, but
mhm,
often oftentimes when someone is seen as intolerant or bigoted or uneducated, you can think of any number of negative attributes that have been associated with Christians or church or God or whatever, and people don't find it attractive. They don't want
mm,
it. So they don't believe it, they don't want it, they don't need it, and they just don't feel or sense God is real.
mhm.
So it's usually a
Wow.
combination, honestly. It's a combination of motivations and influences and desires, really.
There's actually this YouTuber, Alex O'Connor. You're probably familiar with him, the
Yeah.
cosmic skeptic, right? And he claims to be an
Formerly known as. Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yes.
And he claims to be a non-resistant non-believer or unresistant non-believer. In your studies and the over 120 interviews that you've conducted, is there, in your opinion, is there such thing as a non-resistant non-believer?
That's a really good question. In my research for my doctoral program, I interviewed 50. So
Hmm.
statistically, I can give you some numbers that way and maybe anecdotally otherwise. But in the study that I conducted,
Hmm.
only 12% said, I wish that, and they're looking at their own selves, reflecting
Hmm.
on themselves.
Hmm.
So there was no reason for them to be dishonest with me, trying to cover up anything because I was expecting resistance more than anything else.
Right.
But this non-resistant non-believer was definitely the minority. Now I know, and they self-reported around 12%
Okay.
wished that they could believe, but didn't. But 67%, the nearly two-thirds, three-fourths really,
Hmm.
said there would be nothing that would ever convince them to move from atheism. So generally speaking, there was a
Right.
very high level of resistance. But that non-resistant non-believer, I guess you could look at that theologically as well, because in Romans it says we all, you know, suppress the truth in unrighteousness, and no one is good. And so there's this sense in which all of us have I can't say that no one is ever non-resistant against God, because I think
Hmm.
that is the human nature. That's our
Right.
sinful nature, to resist
Yes.
God. So, that's a little bit of a tricky question. I think
Hmm.
sometimes people say that they're not resistant. I wish I could believe.
Hmm.
Alex is an extremely brilliant young man, but, I don't know that I would consider him down to his core non-resistant.
Hmm.
He
Hmm.
has built a ginormous platform, and for good reason. I believe he said he's lived with Christians, he's studied theology, he's gone
Hmm.
to Oxford, he's done the hard work. He wished
Hmm.
that he could believe, but yeah, but he still fights very hard against it and has an amazing platforms to do that as well. So I
Yeah.
don't know, I don't know. We're all a mixed bag, I would say.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Is there, out of all of the 50 that you've interviewed for your PhD, but then the other, are those 50 also included in Ex-Skeptic podcast?
A few of them
Okay, a
are.
few of them. So
A
some
few
of
of them
those
are.
in the 120 in your podcast, a lot of those are not from your study. So those are
That's right.
additional. Oh
That's
wow.
right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
in the totality of, wow, so you might have interviewed over 160, let's say, or so conversions, right? Stories and testimonies. From those, are there some that are really impactful that really stay with you, whether it's in the book or whether it's not in the book, in your book, that really stick out to you?
Yes. There's different kinds of stories, just like we talked about different kinds of disbelief.
Hmm.
There are some stories that are very dramatic in a sense, that the transformation is so dramatic that you can only say only God. The very first gentleman that I sat down with in England to hear his story, they had to fill out a little form talking
Mm.
about what age did you become an atheist and why did you become an atheist? And he had become an atheist at age 7. And it
Wow.
was, I knew something dramatic or traumatic must have happened. And
Yeah.
sure enough, as soon as he sat down, it just started spilling out. He had lived in a little house with 3 of his siblings, but at age 7, his house caught on fire. One brother was trapped inside and died. He and his sister ran out of the front door, were standing in the front yard when his other brother came out in flames,
Wow.
and died that same week. He said that the next Sunday he went to church, at a church where he had been taught that Jesus loved him. And the pastor came over to him and said, "Can I pray for you?" And he said, "No, how can I believe in a God who loves me?" Basically,
Mm.
he would have let something like
Wow.
this happen. And so what happened from there was he developed, as he grew older, of course, there was just an intense amount of emotional pain,
Hmm.
but he wrapped that emotional pain in kind of a rational armor. So he
Mm.
became highly intellectual and rational with regard,
Mm.
and evangelical in his atheism.
Right.
It was as if he didn't believe in God, he didn't want anybody else to believe in God. He wouldn't even step foot in a church for a wedding or a funeral. So
Wow.
his walls were very high. At age 26, because the big question for me in looking at all of these stories is, someone is moving down one direction. Okay, what changes that?
Mm.
What disrupts that? What makes someone become open? What opens the door to a possibility of God? For him, he came back home from a business trip. His wife at the time had become a Christian. That
Oh.
just was fuel to the fire for his marriage, which was contentious as it was.
Mm.
One night he went to go pick her up at the house of the couple that had brought her to Christ, and he was expecting, this heated exchange. And he walked in, and they offered him a cup of coffee and to sit down and just to visit. He said, and I think that he had become quite a hardened, difficult personality because of the statement that he made. He said, "They valued me. They treated me like I was a human."
Wow.
So they just sat down. They didn't, he didn't berate them at the moment, but they just had just a lovely conversation and
Mm.
visited. And he felt so valued that he wanted to come back. So
Wow.
he started coming back. They would open their home to him every night. They never talked about God, pushed religion, or any of that until
Wow.
several weeks later, where he kept coming back. He was developing a genuine friendship and love for one another, and
Hmm.
respect for each other, until he started bringing up the questions of God and suffering and pain in his own life.
Wow.
But over a period of time, it took months really, to where
Hmm.
he ran out of arguments and issues against God. They had been so gracious, but also informed. They
Mm.
were knowledgeable, they were thoughtful about their own faith. It was obvious that they took their belief in God seriously, so they could have meaningful exchange, as well as just this warmth and care that exuded from them.
Wow.
And finally, the gentleman said, "Can I pray for you?" And he said, "Yes." And he said, I wasn't exactly sure what he was praying or what it meant, but he said, all I knew was I felt a peace overcome me that I had never known before. And he said, I
Wow.
woke up the next morning expecting this anger to return, and he said it
Hmm.
didn't. And he said from there, actually, he went on to become a pastor in his
Wow.
little English community, just going around and healing the emotional wounds, serving, loving people in his community like he had been loved And now he's a strong apologist for the Christian faith,
Wow.
not only intellectually, but spiritually in every other way. I think just because I think that was the first story that I really heard, and it was so dramatic.
Mm.
That one always sticks with me, but it speaks to how emotional pain can be ministered to with love. Sometimes the
Mm.
best apologetic is not I don't think an argument right away for him would have made any difference. I think it would have probably fueled the fire, and it would have just been a game of firing intellectual bullets. But instead, he was softened and loved and brought into the possibility of God because he had felt it, through these people, and also seen the life change in his wife. So he knew that there was something real. He just didn't know quite what to do with it. But over time, he allowed himself to become open to the possibility, and it was a beautiful ending.
Wow. That's incredible. Praise God. Is there, you mentioned that they would take him in and they wouldn't, proselyte him or try and convince him out of his atheism, right? I think many Christians think that how we approach skeptics would be, our first conversation is to convince them that there is a God and, throw all of these arguments their way. But do you think also from the encounters that you've had in your studies, in your book, that is actually not as effective, and that the more effective way is just really to build an authentic relationship and genuinely care about someone versus trying to jump the gun? You mentioned also that it was him that initiated that conversation about God. Is that something where believers just develop that relationship? There's a saying that there's the four gospels, but there's actually the fifth gospel, and we are the fifth gospel, right? Is that something that you would suggest to Christians trying to reach out to skeptics, maybe to, don't try and pressure yourself right away to, convert this person. Just genuinely get to know them, be kind to them, sit down with them, listen to them.
I think, yes, all of the above. I believe sometimes we see, what is the phrase? If you have a hammer, everything becomes a nail, and you want to approach
Right.
it, just hard. But just like we as Christians are all very different, our atheists are all very different. We come to our faith, our beliefs in different ways and for different reasons. And I think the first thing to do is just to really get to know the other person, listen, understand what they think, what their objections are. Oftentimes, again, we're just putting the cart ahead of the horse, cart ahead of the horse. Instead of really taking the time to get to know, are they even open to the idea of a conversation? One of the biggest questions for me in terms of openness and approach was, why did someone, or what is it that allows someone to become open to the possibility of God? Is it something rational? Is it something other? And that informs how you engage, right?
Okay.
So if somebody is really intellectually driven, which ended up, if that's the thing that is very important to them, say somebody is a technologist,
Yeah.
physician, scientist, and knowledge and information it's who they are, it's how they roll, it's how they think, and that is on the forefront, then it may be good to engage in a conversation that's more intellectually driven if they really are truly interested. About 20% of those that I studied were really driven to find intellectual answers and wanted to engage from the beginning on that. It was in one of two ways. One is that if they're, say, scientifically minded, and they're coming to some information, or they're asking the bigger questions. Well, how did everything come from nothing? Did organic life, start from non-life? Where do we get the information in the cell? It's incredibly sophisticated. This explanation doesn't seem to make sense to me. Where do we get objective moral values and duties? So there are those people who become dissatisfied with their own intellectual framework for reality, because without God, if you're in an atheistic worldview that's very reductionistic. So all of your answers have to come within this determined worldview of closed cause and effect. You can't seek answers outside of that. So it's really odd to say everything came here in a sophisticated, beautiful, diverse way from nothing, for no reason, and there's no purpose, there's no design. That's
Right.
counterintuitive. So you're having to buy answers like, well, it's design is an illusion. And you're thinking, what? That doesn't sound very sophisticated or rational to me. Or my own free will, or my consciousness, or my own human dignity, or those kind of thoughtful things. So there are those people who are either intellectually dissatisfied with their own worldview, willing to look outside, or sometimes even gently confronted with strategic questioning. And you can play on that intellectual playground, and they're ready to go. But 80% of them, believe it or not, became open to the possibility of Christianity because something about it was good or attractive. They had a felt need. They saw someone who had life that was a quality of life that was better. That's why they're living in a world. I heard a little tweet the other day, a scroll of a young woman saying, "Is this all there is? Is this really all there is? Yeah, I'll date somebody, and then I'll get married, and then we'll have a family, and then I go to work, and then we become grandparents, and then you die. Is this really it?" And I think some people are honest enough that their life is empty. Of course, we're living in a world with a lot of meaninglessness and meaning crisis and emptiness, and trying to figure all this out, and is posing and pretending, is that really is what it's all about? What about all this, the darkness that I'm experiencing when I'm by myself? And what is that? And so a lot of people, about a third of the people in my study actually were willing to say, is there something more? Is there something else? And there were also, what's an astounding statistic from my study, as well as Joel Furches, is 82% of people in my study met a Christian that showed them a better quality of life, that presented to them good reasons for belief, that intersected their life in some way that presented an embodiment of the gospel, hospitality, warmth, love, care, showed a life of meaning and purpose, pointed them in the direction of God. It's significant, our presence in someone's life. You don't know who's watching, who's listening, who's observing. If you bring them in so they can experience something different. But there comes a point of essentially felt need, or through a crisis that can happen, that someone is going along, they're satisfied, they don't need God, they don't want to hear it from you. It's not anything they need nor anything they want. But sometimes, a health crisis, a divorce, a relationship breakup, a financial crisis, things get unsettled, discombobulated, if that's a word you use in Toronto. But things get upset, and so their way of coping becomes it becomes viable in terms of on the table. Is what I believe enough to help me resolve this crisis? Can I make sense of it? Because at the end of the day, whether it's intellectually or in our own lives or our ideas, we all want to make sense of who we are and how we move in around the world.
Yeah.
And so if our worldview is not satisfying, if it's not making sense, whether intellectually, existentially, experientially, then someone can become open. So back to your question, what is the best way? Is, first of all, like you say, be involved, be present in someone's life. Because oftentimes they won't be interested. They won't need it. They don't want it. They don't believe it. But when questions come, I was going to say it this way, when someone becomes dissatisfied with their own worldview, they'll become open towards another. Because at the end of the day, we are all human, and we want to be satisfied, to make sense. We are meaning-seeking beings who are trying to make sense of reality. All of us trying to find our way. So the most important thing is to be present in someone's life so that you can be there when a crisis comes, so that you can show them an embodied way to live that's different than they know. Be prepared so that you can start to engage in a meaningful way with questions that they have. Be prayerful, of course, but yes, being present, I think I can't say that enough, being present in someone's life so that, but yeah, establishing a relationship, a rapport, a sense of mutual respect and trust is critical. Yeah, not to berate, not to pound, not to, tell them they're going to hell, not to, if you don't, it's because, as you know, it's easier to build bridges rather than walls, make it approachable, make it accessible, make it easier to ask, make it easier to wonder, to
Right.
connect. Yeah.
Wow. That's brilliant. That's really brilliant. So intellectually, existentially, experientially. You mentioned that 82%, right? Meta-Christian, just like the first testimony that you shared.
Mhm.
What if that couple that he was meeting, you said that they were prepared for the answers, or the questions rather, that he was asking. What if they weren't prepared? Did he indicate, or have any other, former atheists or former skeptics indicate that, okay, well, I did run into someone who I challenged intellectually, but they didn't have anything to give back, and I continued on my kind of atheistic journey. So what do you think, if that couple wasn't ready to answer the questions that this man have, who'd later on become a pastor? Do you think that would have, at least halted or delayed in a sense? And do you think that that's important? I mean, you obviously you study apologetics, teach
Mm.
apologetics, but how important is it today?
I think it's critically important. One is when in my study, I asked them how they had encountered Christians as atheists. Were
Okay.
they prepared? Were they able to ask good questions? Were they able to answer their questions? Were they knowledgeable? And unfortunately, it seemed to be rather an indictment. The majority of Christians that they encountered were not informed. One of the most indicting statistic that I got, they had to check boxes of, as atheists, how they perceived Christians. Not one person checked the box that they thought that Christians were educated people. Ouch.
Wow.
Not
0%.
one, 0%. 72% thought they were deluded.
Wow.
They basically thought, because atheism is a general rule, they are more highly educated and more intellectual, and so there's this sense of rational superiority. And then when they encounter Christians who haven't been thoughtful about their faith, they may know what they believe, but not why they believe. They can't talk about it on terms that can even relate to the non-Christian. So they perceive it as, well, you just believe because the Bible tells you so,
Yeah.
and the Bible tells you to believe, and so that's your holy book. So, but
Yeah, it's
there's
just
nothing.
circular reasoning.
Yeah, there's nothing beyond that. I mean, I was certainly caught in that trap, and it was when I was helping a seeker-oriented group at church, and I had no idea how to answer their questions. And so it's what really helped prompt me to, the Lord was pushing me like, okay, you need to do something about this. But what I want to say is, obviously, in my study, there were several who encountered Christians who weren't able to, they seemed to have a more defensive posture. They weren't open to honest discussion. And I think that defensiveness comes when you're not prepared. There's a
Yes.
there's a quiet confidence that comes when you've done due diligence, and that the Christian worldview actually has the answers to all the big questions of life and the universe, that it has the best explanation for reality no matter where you turn. And when you
Yes.
have that, when you know that for good reason, as compared to other worldviews that don't offer that, then you can approach a conversation with a lot more gentility, with confidence, with openness, with fairness, not defensiveness, so that you don't mind asking the questions because truth does not fear questioning. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to know everything about everything. And certainly, if you put me in a room with a lot of people who are incredibly knowledgeable about so many different areas that I have no clue, but yet I know, because the hard work has been done, I'm convinced that the Christian worldview is irrational and reasonable, and the best, most comprehensive worldview makes the best explanation and most sense of reality. I'm not so much afraid to engage, to be present, to have those conversations, because the truth really is on our side. So yes, people dismiss Christians because they were uneducated. They dismiss Christians because they weren't thoughtful. They didn't ask good questions. They weren't ready to engage. And so they went on until, a different time in their life. So, I mean, we all fail. None of us but we're called to be ambassadors and to give a reason for
Yes.
the hope that we have. So if I can encourage someone, I remember when I started my study into apologetics, I thought, you know what, if just for my daughters, and for myself, that I can help train them as they're trying to navigate all of these different worldviews, it was enough. But then, of course, when you know that we have this beautiful and dynamic and explanatory truth on our side, you want other people to know as well.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
When you talk about defensive posture, what are some defensive postures that you've encountered that Christians might display?
I think that sometimes if we don't know, or if we are feeling an affront, we'll shut down. I think that's
Mm,
probably one way that we're defensive. We'll shut down. We have a
mm,
tendency to call out the other. Oh, you're just, and then that
mm,
old ad hominem. Oh, you're just, you are, or just, throwing out a statement and just not engaging, and I'm not going to worry about you,
uh,
or what, just trying to
mm,
dismiss and leave, and you're
mm,
pushing back instead of verbally engaging, instead of warmly saying, hey, I want to get to know you. I really,
mm,
one of the best things that I can recommend is, if you're feeling defensive, you said it almost at the beginning, just listen. Say,
mm,
I'd really like to know more about you and your story. Can we just sit down? Of course, I have a podcast where I just want to know people's stories, because there's no non-fascinating person.
mhm.
Everyone has a story, and
Yeah.
everyone, for the most part, loves to be listened to,
Mhm.
and valued, and to be heard, and it just helps you understand where they're coming from. And that is the opposite of defensive, right? It's
Yeah.
it's offensive, but it's inviting. It's inviting people in to really, again, share themselves in a deeper way. Of course, you have, and nobody likes to talk to someone who's not listening. They're not paying attention. Their eyes are going somewhere else. They're not really curious. They may be, okay, I was supposed to talk to you today. In fact, my daughter was approached just yesterday in a Target,
Mm.
um, by a young woman who you could tell it was okay. What do you believe? Now, can you come to my Bible study? If she felt like a project, rather
Right,
than,
right.
this defensiveness, and isn't the only posture. It can just
Mm.
be artificial or
Yes.
non-authentic. It
Right,
can
right.
be contrived, or I'm going to put another notch on my belt. Oh, see, I got,
Right.
rather than really get, as you've talked about before too, just really caring and engaging and wanting the best for the other. That's agape love, right? Wanting the
Mm.
best for the other. I don't want something from you. I want something for you. And I just really
Wow.
want to know where you are, and I'd love to hear about it. And that way you can really see why they are defensive sometimes to Christ or to the gospel, and
Right.
just You're right, right, because you want those walls to come down, whether it's on their side or on your side, so you can have an honest exchange in a way that's not combative. But I mean, people
Mm.
have real doubts, real issues, and just putting them on the table in a fair-minded way, in a way that's safe. People approach others who are safe.
Wow, that's, that kind of brings me back to also when I was really doubting and questioning, because I remember I would actually approach different pastors and I would ask them, and what you described as defensive posture was that it was almost, being dismissive. Or I remember I had a pastor actually tell me, we'll talk another time. I approached him after the message and I was like, what about this? This doesn't really make any sense. How can we, how this? And I think I don't know, it must have been 14 at the time or something, right? And I remember the pastor just kind of dismissing, just being like, "Oh, we'll talk another time." And you sense that, right? You sense that defensive posture. You sense that, like, oh, okay, well, you're just not making any sense. You're just a skeptic, and you sense that. I think our humanity can really see through kind of the facade, right? And just like what you said with your daughter, it just feels like someone's inviting you to another, network marketing meeting or something like that, right? Where, okay, is this okay? You just invited me to another religious gathering, as opposed to, hey, are you really getting to know me and really forming that authentic connection? I'm wondering then if, I think a lot of believers today, unfortunately, followers of Jesus Christ are unprepared, because like what you said, a lot of the skeptics have really studied their position and actively sought out why their position is right. They can defend it scientifically with physics, they can defend it philosophically, logically, and sometimes even historically, right? And even biblically. Some of them are more well read in the Bible.
Yes, absolutely.
And so when a Christian wants to reach out to someone, but they feel like, oh my goodness, I cannot go toe to toe with what this person's saying. I might even have doubts with what they're saying. What can they do so that they don't fall into that same doubt? Or how can they respond in a way that's not defensive?
That's a very good question, because like I say, there's some very intimidating, very bright people, and it's hard
Yes.
to feel as if you can be even in the same intellectual playground as them. And I understand that. It's what I've found is sometimes people are very bright. I'm not denying the intellect. Like Alex O'Connor is extremely bright and
Hmm.
articulate, and it would be incredibly intimidating. And he has been very thoughtful. But there are many people who are perhaps extremely bright in one particular thing. Say it's biology, and they can
Hmm.
tell you all about molecular biology and all of that, and they have written off for Christianity for scientific reasons. But I guess it's the way that I'm made a bit, is that I think of things more holistically. And
Mm.
one of the very first lectures I heard when I went into apologetics is, we have a cumulative case for the Christian worldview. It's not just that you have to go toe to toe in one area of life and win, but you can actually look at all of reality and see how it
Yeah.
points to the need for God.
Mm.
So whether it's, again, external to ourselves in the universe, from the cosmos to the cell, there's a lot that has to be explained, as well as ourselves, our own consciousness, that we have free will to choose, that we have love that's real and available, that there are a lot of, that we have objective meaning and purpose, that we can actually call things evil and good.
Hmm.
Um, if you lose God, you not only lose human dignity and value and purpose and meaning, but you lose all these wonderful explanations for, again, design in the cell or fine tuning of the universe or whatever. Now,
Hmm.
people can find things to be, I want to use this in the right way, argumentative about. There are issues, they're issue driven, and they can find things and push things and promote things. But again, I would want to step back. First of all, if you feel like you're not capable or competent, engage on that level, find someone who is. Also start to read a little bit on your own in terms of the cumulative case argument for Christianity, so that when you go into these conversations, you can know good questions to ask. That I'm sure you've probably heard of Greg Koukl. He has a book called Tactics. So if somebody, oftentimes the skeptic will try to put the burden of proof on you as the Christian. They're saying, you're the one who has the burden of proof here. You believe in this supernatural God.
When you're making the claim.
You're making the claim, right? Exactly. You know exactly what I'm talking about. But they make a claim, so they claim, all of their claims have to be grounded as well. And so in order to get out of the hot box, or the hot seat rather, you start to begin to ask questions. A lot of people throw out slogans. I don't believe in God, or the Bible is correct, or whatever. And you not only ask them to say, well, tell me more, why, what do you believe? Can you clarify that for me? But also, why do you believe that? What do you mean by that? Can you give me reasons for that? Because oftentimes we're just stuck with the slogan. We've been cut down, but we're not asking them to justify their claims. Why do you believe that? What do you mean that the Bible is corrupt? Can you give me an example of that?
Right,
if you see people who are really good in this public square of even like in politics, it's interesting. People will make claims, and then I'll hear the person who's speaking with them say, well, give me an example of that. Well, what do you mean by that? And they can't. They say, well, no, I've got to go now, or trying to change topic or whatever. Because again, it's not only the Christian who hasn't thought deeply about their worldview. Oftentimes it's the other. So just try to engage. And if you can't figure out what they're talking about, or you'll get a better sense of what they believe. And then if you don't know, go and find out, or find someone who you can bring into the conversation. So there's a lot of different things at play, but just being intimidated by someone's maybe intellectual accomplishments, they may be incredibly bright in something and completely ignorant as to the whole of what Christianity and belief in God has to offer, even intellectually. But they want to stay on their hobby horse because it gets them to be able to dismiss you. But we just need to take a slower, broader, more thoughtful path about it, and asking questions, and keeping them on the defensive, in a sense, to justify their own claims is a good way to go. So that,
Wow. Yeah, sometimes offense is the best defense, right? Yeah, and I notice, you mentioned Alex O'Connor, and I noticed with Alex, he's very brilliant at asking those questions. So I remember watching an interview with him, even with William Lane Craig, and how he was putting Craig on the defensive, right? And he's just brilliant at when a Christian will make a statement, he'll ask a question to kind of plant that seed of doubt, right? And kind of move from that, even though the question itself is, may not even, it might be a straw man, right? And notice that, someone would get extremely intimidated, right? Someone like Alex O'Connor who came in, who obviously he's doing this for a living, right? This is how he makes his bread, right? By, his agnosticism. But, that's very smart. That's very wise advice to go to someone that knows, right? Or there's enough, the resources out there are available to Christians. I mean, just like what we're doing now, like the videos are out there available, resources, websites are out there available. Do you think that, we were talking about this earlier. We've actually, it's funny because I have I had 11 questions for you, and we've actually only gone through 3 of them. And I see that we're hitting the 1 hour mark. But there's one question that I really want to ask you, and we talked about it earlier, kind of off stage, was, do you see a shift in the culture right now, in an openness to Christianity? I mean, you're a veteran in the apologetics field. Is there something different from, let's say, 10, 20 years ago to what you're witnessing now happening, in the culture?
I think there's a real dramatic shift, honestly. I think it's, whereas probably what you experienced as well, the new atheism and the real animosity towards Christianity, where it was hard to even say that you were a Christian in public. And now we have public intellectual figures like Jordan Peterson and Ayaan Hirsi Ali become, well, Ayaan is a Christian. Jordan Peterson, he's not a Christian, but his wife and daughter are. But he respects the Bible. He's bringing it forward. Now, granted, he thinks things are Jesus is archetypal, and all of that's another issue. But what he's doing is there's this sense of what we call plausibility. If the plausibility of belief is poor, then people will dismiss it out of hand without consideration. If plausibility is positive, which it's becoming because of figures like Tom Holland, the British historian who wrote Dominion, and this amazing book that shows that Christianity informed the really wonderful norms and cultures of the West. Even Richard Dawkins, what was it, last year during Easter time, he called himself a cultural Christian.
Cultural Christian, yeah.
Because Christianity was, in his mind, was better than Islam in terms of civilization. Now, what that does is it changes the plausibility. So something that wasn't, for him, religion was poison. Well, that was, Christopher Hitchens, but he dismissed Christianity as dangerous and stupid and ridicule and dismiss at the,
yes.
But now he's saying, well, maybe I would rather live in a Christian society. So that changes the temperature of the water, as it were. So it's easier to wade in when Douglas Murray and Tom Holland, all these people are saying, yes, Christianity is a good thing. It's something, you need to keep Christianity weird. In the midst of this cancel culture, it's something that Christianity stands out as there's actually grace and forgiveness. There's something different. There's something good. And like we mentioned before, there's such a existential crisis especially among the younger generations, of loss of meaning, the aimlessness, this, this expressive individualism where you're trying to find your own way, make your own self, create yourself, all of these things that cause anxiety and depression and technology. There's just so much lostness that people are saying, no, wait, this may be the anchor. This may be the source of life that I've been looking for. And I believe that, statistically speaking, at least young men in the Gen Z generation, in the US at least, there's a pivotal turn towards conservatism, which also means conservative belief towards God and more traditional. I think you see pendulums swing, and I think that the pendulum of leftism and wokeism and all of that, and so much chaos, that people are seeking order, seeking meaning, seeking stability, seeking something solid rather than a house built on sand. They're looking for a firm foundation built on the rock. And I do believe this is a time where we as Christians have an opportunity. I'm praying for revival. I'm praying that people are more willing, at least in the United States, people are actually not apologizing for holding those more conservative values anymore. It's been weird. I mean, weird in a good way, that you can talk about God and praising God for
say Merry Christmas.
Right. And that you're not going to be canceled. So I think that definitely this is a momentous moment, pivotal moment, that we as Christians can be less fearful of embodying faith in a public way, much less privately, because people are searching. They've tried it, and they've tried apart from God, and it hasn't tasted so good. And I think people are willing. Now, some people, obviously there's still pushback, as I'm sure in Canada, there's a real still struggle. And
but in fact, a lot of our kind of conservative, our Christian friends are looking at the U.S. right now, and we're going, maybe.
maybe.
And we're kind of, there's a shift happening here too, where the Conservative Party is also starting to make a rise also in Canada. I think they felt the, years of Trudeau and the Liberal Party just kind of driving us into the well. And a lot of people are beginning to speak up as well now. The conservatives and the Christians are beginning to, really stand up and push back against, especially the woke ideology. And more people are having, courage to do that. But definitely a lot of us here in Canada are looking at the US right now and we're wondering, like, is that going to happen here, right? At our next election,
Yeah, right. I heard John Stone Street talk about this sense of inevitability that we,
Mm,
the last 10 years, 12 years, whatever, have been kind of dark and seeming
yeah,
this inevitable end that things are just going to only get darker. But when there's God, there's always hope, and there's always
yeah,
the possibility of transformation and change, right? And
yes,
so we're seeing something happen in the US, and I know that there are populist movements around the globe, actually, and courage
yep,
begets courage. And I think that we're
yes.
seeing a time, even globally, and Lord willing, even in Canada, where
Hmm.
you'll feel a temperature change.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are looking to the US and they're going, "Hey, it's okay to speak about Jesus. It's okay to say that I'm Christian." And I mean, for a long time in Canada, people were getting canceled, right? You can't have a Bible
Right.
study. Yeah, you can defend every other religion. You can celebrate every other religious holiday, just not Christianity. You could bring every other book, just not the Bible, to the workplace, right? And I think there's a new courage, I think, welling up within believers, seeing that, oh, maybe we won't get pushed back. Maybe there's more of us out there. And as one person stands up, then, another, and then another, and then another. And yeah, just like you, we're praying for a movement as well. And, it's been such a blessing to get in touch with you. You're so, how you word things, it's so articulate, and it just makes sense. How you're explaining things. I guess one last question. I actually just two last questions, but they won't take that long, I promise. It would be what, since that spiritual climate is changing and, there's more of an openness, what can we do as individuals, as Christians, but also as maybe churches, organizations? What can we do right now to really take advantage of that, that
I,
shift that's happening?
right. In the last, there was, and I was a strong part of it, this kind of seeker oriented movement that was trying to be so relevant to the
Mm,
to the culture, so that the culture would feel comfortable for the unchurched and all of that.
hmm.
And I kind of bought into that narrative, and it seemed effective there for a while. I think that
Hmm.
the culture has changed.
Mm,
And as again, Doug Murray says, we need to embrace our weirdness in a sense. I speak with
yeah.
my daughter, who is 22. She's a Gen
Mm,
Z, and
mm,
she speaks about it all the time. What you can get in the world, why would you come to church if you can get what you can get in the church in
mm,
the world? And I think that there's a sense in which the church has bent
yes.
over backwards to become so relevant that they've become irrelevant. And I'm sure
Wow.
you've
Yes.
noticed the more liberal minded churches are losing their
Mhm,
membership, because again, what's to differentiate between the church and the world if it's just kind of the same thing?
mhm,
So I think that especially in the younger generations, because they're looking again for something solid, they're looking for truth. And when you even read and hear individual narratives of people who were pushing back against maybe what they saw as the over morality, or over moralizing of the church or whatever.
mhm,
But when people bump into something that's real and
yeah.
true and life-giving, what they don't want is to see you compromised.
Yeah.
Then, and I've heard this more than once, there was a young woman on my podcast who went to Yale. She was same-sex attracted, but she said when she started meeting Christians, the first Christian she met on campus, and she was interested in Christianity. She was trying to find her way because she was a little bit discombobulated. There's that word. Because of coming to a new place and just not finding her way, and
Mhm.
she's found this Christian thing, and then the first thing she found were some Christians, but they gave her this little pamphlet about it's okay, everything, her whatever lifestyle she chooses, it's okay. And she said, I went back and I looked at the Bible and I read the Bible and I realized what they were saying didn't line up with what I read. And
Mm.
she totally lost respect for someone trying to what she felt like compromise, even though it would completely call her into living in a different way.
Right.
And I've heard this over and over and again, is that we as Christians need to stand true to what is
Yes.
true. Because we know that Jesus is truth. We know that believing in him brings life. We know that if we lose our life in him, we will find it. It's a better way. It's the harder way. It's actually the narrow way, as Jesus says. But it
Yes.
is the way that brings life. And if we are loving others, we are loving others with the agape love as the love that is best for the other. It's not compromising. It's not watering down. It's not pretending that we don't, stand for certain things. We need to be clear. Clarity is kindness. I've been in the, I've witnessed firsthand the midst of a church who tries to compromise, and then they get lost. Everything gets lost because then they can't stand for anything because they don't want to offend anyone. And then you're like,
Right.
well, where do you stand on this or that? And they can't tell you
Mm.
publicly
Right.
because it might alienate. Well, the gospel's offensive. We're all
Yes.
called to live in ways that we don't like or we don't want, but there's a way that we've been called, and that's the
Wow.
way of truth and the way of
Mm.
life. And we cannot compromise that because we're inviting people in.
Yeah.
The way that I'll end with this is that we're inviting people into the feast of Christ. We're inviting people. People are broken. They know there's something wrong. If you just put a Band-Aid on something, and it's really a broken heart issue or a soul issue, the Band-Aid is maybe make you, I don't feel better for a moment, but it's not going to solve your problem. If you bring somebody in who's looking, they're starving, and you're just gonna give them a dessert, a piece of pie. That's not what
Wow.
their soul is craving. They're craving truth. At the end of the day,
Yeah.
they're craving life in God and Christ and what's true and life-giving and meaningful. So we can't compromise. As a church, we cannot compromise because then we're just really compromising on the gospel, on what is life that's truly life. Um, so I would say stand strong and be courageous. But of course, that's done, as you say, in gentleness and truth, as also Peter would say. We do this with respect and love that's substantive, love love that does not compromise, does not rejoice in unrighteousness, but rejoices in
Yes.
truth. So it's a beautiful balance of love and truth. Yeah. So you can't love without truth, and you can't just be truthful without love. It is that beautiful combination of, Jesus is the embodiment of truth and grace, and we're called to be that.
Amen. Wow.
I feel like I just gave a little
Preach it.
mini, mini sermon. Yeah.
That reminds me of Andrew Tate and the reason why he converted to Islam. Because he was in his search for, he was like, okay, well, there is a God. I'm not an atheist. There has to be a God. Which is the right God? He was like, maybe it's the Christian God. And I think he saw some drag queen, saying, I'm a Christian drag queen and all that. And then Andrew Tate said, even that was the moment when I knew it can't be this.
Mm.
It can't be Christianity because Christianity doesn't have a backbone. And so, like you said, there was someone looking for truth, and he saw, I made a video about, or I haven't published it yet, but I said, well, that like a lot of us Christians wouldn't even consider that Christian, right? But to a lot of outsiders, they're looking at that and they're going, oh, that's what Christianity is. They're not really standing on anything. And one of the things that he said, well, what Islam stands on it, Islam is not afraid to offend someone, etc. And I think, yeah, we have to go back to that, the truth, and stand for the truth. So yeah, my last question is there anything upcoming, any upcoming projects, with your podcast or anything else that you're excited about that you'd like, people to know about?
Yes, we have all of these incredible stories. We have over 100 stories of ex-skeptics or ex-atheists who are now passionate followers of Christ on our podcast. And they also give advice to people who are searching, curious skeptics who want to take step forward. They also give advice
Mm-hmm.
to Christians who want to engage with those who are skeptical, on every podcast. And we've developed this beautiful treasure, but it's all thrown in the same chest. So
Mm-hmm.
it's hard to sort out if you're looking for a particular story, if you have a heart for someone, or you yourself have a certain issue. Maybe it's science and
Yeah.
faith. Maybe you've been
Mm-hmm.
hurt by Christians. Maybe there's all kinds of different stories. And so we're looking to make those stories more accessible by developing playlists of certain kinds of stories,
Nice.
for different reasons why people reject God, and how they
Wow.
found their way to God. And that's a huge hope and prayer for me that
Yeah.
that we're going to be doing that in the next few months, making these kinds of resources available, because they're really here for those who are there to listen, to seek, to find, and to share, actually. And so that's one of our big goals this year.
Nice. And is that going to be on the podcast, is it on YouTube, on the
Yeah,
website?
right. We're going to create particular podcast playlists on YouTube. We're going to have
Okay.
it available on our website as well. And we're actually looking to develop certain podcast mini-series that deal with different issues as
Cool.
well. So there's a lot on the
A lot of
table, a
things.
lot to
Yeah.
be done, but we're excited about it. Thank you for asking.
Nice. Yeah. Well, we'll make sure that that link is down below, and that your YouTube channel is down below as well in the description. And we have the banner going across there. That's the website. Is that the website, ex-skeptic.org?
That's correct.
Okay. And yeah, well, thank you so much for coming on. It's been a joy. It's been refreshing. This was, thank you for responding when we were reaching out. It's, I still have, I'm only 3 questions in, but, I hope, we can do this again sometime.
Absolutely.
But, the work that you're doing is encouraging. It's inspiring. Keep at it. There's so many questions that so many people have that are being answered through those interviews. And I'm just excited to see that archive just grow and grow and grow, and excited for what's to come. So thank you again. God bless you. God bless your ministry. And hopefully we'll see each other again.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me, Vince. It's been a real pleasure.
Okay. Have a great day. God bless.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Welcome to the Revo Report. We're inspiring faith with reason and reason with faith.